My name is Ryan Meehan. I'm 29 years old. I've been of the faith for about 8 years now. I had a big conversion when I was 21 years old, and we're here today. I'm going to share my story with everyone, and hopefully my words are able to reach someone's heart. When we're younger, about the age of 6 years old, that's when everyone says that's when you come of age of reason. And at that time, I began asking the big questions. Why were we created? Who created us? What was our purpose in life? I remember going to my mom and asking her one day, who created us? And she said, God. And I remember saying to her, who is God? And she said, well, it's just someone who created us. I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. My parents are Irish Catholic. They never went to church on Sundays. I was baptized as an infant, and that was the only thing I knew of God, was that question that I asked my mom, and she said that God created us. So then I started to search out who God is. My best friend was Catholic. One day, my best friend took me into that church. It was called St. Cecilia's Church in Northeast Philadelphia in Fox Chase. And I remember we went in. He taught me the sign of the cross. We blessed ourselves with holy water, and we went to the front of the church, and he pointed to the crucifix and he said, that's God. And he said, and you can receive him in the Eucharist. And I said, well, what's the Eucharist? He said, that's the body of Christ, where we believe that Jesus is given to us in the form of bread and wine, where we receive him every Sunday. And I said, well, I want to receive God. And he said, well, you need to become Catholic first. So I remember going home and asking my parents if I can go to Catholic school. And my parents said, well, you can either go to Catholic school or you can play ice hockey. We can't afford both. So naturally, I chose what I thought would be the better part. I'm a young kid, I was active, always outside. I chose ice hockey. And from there, I just fell in love with the sport. So much so that it led me to where I am today. My parents, they were amazing. They did everything to make my brother's lives and my life as happy as it could be. So we then, at the age of 12 years old, after 5th grade, we moved over to South Jersey. There was this whole new way of life, new environment for me, new people, new culture, everything. And I had to become adjusted to that. So in 6th grade, a couple of months after we moved into our brand new house, our house caught on fire. We lost our entire house, all of our possessions. From there, we moved into a hotel for an entire year. We lived out of a hotel, and my brothers and I, we were glued to each other at that time. We used to fight all the time, and my brothers and I, we've never become so close. And it was a fun time, but it was a tough time as well. But again, I still yearn for this relationship with God. When I was 6 years old, my aunt was murdered. She was my dad's sister, the glue who held the entire family together, and she was also my godmother. The death of my aunt, it really devastated my father in such a way it led him down a dark path. And from that moment, my dad was never really the same. By 8th grade, at the end of my 8th grade year, my dad hit rock bottom for the first time in his life. And he wanted to go to rehab. I remember he pulled me into his room and he said, I'm an alcoholic and I'm struggling with addictions. And I was just in disbelief. And in the end of it, he blamed everything on my mom. As my dad was going to rehab, again, I was transitioning into a high school environment without my dad in my life, without my mother in my life. So I no longer had this relationship with either of my parents moving into a high school environment. I began to have all these wounds within me. And the only way I knew to fill those wounds was to turn to the world, because the world says, go have a drink, it's gonna make you happy. Go do some drugs, it's gonna make you happy. Go sleep with women, it's gonna make you happy. And so that's what I did. I did what the world said you needed to do in order to be happy. I did what the world said you needed to do in order to heal my wounds Freshman year comes along. I began hanging out with the seniors. I began going to parties all the time. I began to smoke marijuana. I began to do all kinds of drugs. And again, in this part of my life, I had no relationship with God. I had no idea that God existed, though I yearned for this relationship. Though I had these many wounds, these many pains within my heart, I still continued to do very well academically. I was getting straight A's, and I was doing very well in ice hockey. And my talents of ice hockey then brought me to play at a Catholic school. And immediately, the first thing I wanted to do was receive my sacraments. I was like, man, I'm at Catholic school now. I can receive First Communion and Confirmation. I want to become Catholic. I looked to my peers to see how Catholics lived. And they didn't live any differently than the way that I was living prior to receiving my sacraments. And some of them would say, pray to God when you need something, God will give it to you. I would constantly pray that my parents wouldn't split up or that their marriage would be saved. Help me to do well in ice hockey. Help me get into the NHL. All these things, rather than just adoring the Blessed Sacrament. And that's the only relationship that I had with God, was God, do this for me. God, if you exist, answer this prayer. And all the more, my prayers would never be answered. So then I started to be like, how can God exist if all these bad things are happening in my life? How can God exist if there's evil in the world? How can God exist if I don't even feel love in my own family? And so by the end of high school, my relationship with God grew further apart from Him. Didn't really believe in God anymore. And at the end of high school, I had the chance to go up to Vermont to play ice hockey in the Eastern Junior Hockey League. The Eastern Junior Hockey League at the time was the third best junior league in the United States. I remember once I left in the summer of 2010, my mom left my dad for pretty much the man who she's with today. My dad fell apart completely. I'm in Vermont by myself. And again, I have two brothers. My older brother has slight autism. My younger brother is a freshman in high school at the time. And I would get calls from them saying, Rye, Mom hasn't been home. The gas just got shut off today. And I said to myself that I'm just going to focus on myself. I'm going to focus on getting into the NHL. And once I get into the NHL, I'll be able to come back and help my family get back on its feet. It was this December of 2010, something inside of my heart said, you need to go home. So I made the decision to ultimately give up hockey. Christmas break, I decided to drive home. I told my coach that I'm not coming back after Christmas break. I said, I gotta get my dad back on his feet. I just gotta focus on my father. I also called up my grandmother, my dad's mom, and I said, Mom, we have nowhere to go. Can we move in with you so we can save up enough money to get back into our house, get the utilities turned back on? And she agreed and allowed us to move into, again, Northeast Philadelphia. It just so happened that a junior team in Northeast Philadelphia was asking for a trade from the Vermont team. So I was then able to be traded to the team in Philadelphia. I finished out the season there, and I actually did amazingly better than what I did up in Vermont. I would have a point a game. As a defenseman, that's really good. And I remember at the end of that, my last game, I said, I'm never gonna touch the ice again. I do remember crying my eyes out. I played the game from when I was 3 years old up until I was 20 years old. From there, my father and I were able to move back into our house. The bills then were over $1,000 in debt. All the utilities were over $1,000 in debt. I was then able to get a full-time job working at Cento Fine Foods. I started at the bottom of the company there, and I quickly, within a year there, moved my way up into a warehouse receiving supervising position. I then had to put all the bills into my name. I made plans with the utility company to get all the payments caught up. the money between my full-time job, my dad working, I was able to save enough money up to where we began starting to pay the mortgage on the house again, which was so far behind that the bank could have taken the house at any time. But I was also able to save enough money up to buy my own car. That started the biggest fight that my father and I have ever gotten into in my entire life. And I remember that after that fight, I left the house. I went down the shore with my girlfriend at the time. Late Sunday night, we came back and I went straight upstairs. My dad slept on the couch downstairs. Around like 3 a.m., my dad was calling me on my cell phone, though he was downstairs, and I didn't pick up the phone. And I kind of had that intuition of why he was calling me, of he was gonna attempt suicide on himself. And I remember looking at that phone and I said, it would be better for him to be out of my life than for me to take care of him the rest of my life. And I said, I hope he doesn't. When I woke up the next morning to go to work, I went downstairs. My dad's car was gone. I went into the kitchen. His pill bottles were all over the counters, Xanax everywhere. And I said, well, maybe he did it. I don't care. I'm going to work. After work, I came home and his car still wasn't there. So I called the cops. I reported him missing. They came to my house to file a missing report. They then located him and told me that he was in critical condition in the ER. He totaled his car. And I remember after that, I didn't go see my father for 2 weeks, though he was in the hospital. After I went to see my father, I went into the room that he was in, and all he said was, hey. He didn't say sorry. He didn't say anything else besides, hey. I realized at that moment that my father had no one else in his life. I was the only one who he had. From that moment on, my dad went into a psychiatric ward. I'm living in this 4-bedroom house. I can't afford all of the bills by myself. Also, 2 weeks before all of that happened, my girlfriend and I broke up. And from that moment on, I was just like left in this isolation, this loneliness. And again, I said, how can God exist if all these things happen in my life? I remember that night crying into my pillow, worried about my future, worried about what was gonna happen. I remember going out to eat with my best friend, and he was just like, well, let me go ask my parents if you can move in with us. So he went and asked his parents, but his mom said, no, the addition's not done to the house. That can't happen yet. So I get in touch with an ex-girlfriend of mine. In the end, I ended up moving into her apartment with her for a couple of months. And now at the time, I had a full-time job. I had a girlfriend. I had everything the world said you needed to have in order to be happy, but I wasn't happy. In fact, I was very miserable. And I remember at the end of the 3 months, we got in this huge fight, and she left for the weekend, and I was in the apartment, and I remember getting down on my knees and I said, God, I can't do this anymore. Help me to get out of this situation. I will do anything you want me to do. And I remember at that moment, it wasn't like something in my mind, but it was something like in my heart. And it felt like someone saying something to my heart. And it said, Ryan, I have a plan for you. It's time to leave. It's time to leave now. It just constantly repeated itself to me. And again, I went out to lunch with my best friend. He said, well, the addition to our house has been built. Let me go ask my parents if you can move in with us. From there, that's where my story really just starts changing. At the end of the week, my friend again reached out to me and said, my mom said you can move in with us, but they want to meet you first. And I said, okay, do I have to worry about anything? And he's like, no, they just want to, talk to you about the rules of the house and stuff like that. So I remember they sat me down, they explained the rules of the house, that I had to pay rent, that I had to do chores, that I had to go to all the family events that they went to. But the one main rule of the house was that I had to go to church on Sundays. And I was like, wow, for the first time in my life, I'm gonna have God. For the first time in my life, I'm gonna have someone to go to mass with. But I also moved in with the expectation that my best friend and I were both 21. We're both single. We'll both be able to go out and party. We'll be great wingmen for each other. And I'll have God on Sundays. But God had different plans right from the beginning. I moved in on a Saturday. It was April 20th, 2013. The next day I went to church. But before I went to mass, I was like, I really want to live out the faith the right way. I know I'm in a state of mortal sin, and I truly believe that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ, and I want to receive the Eucharist in the state of grace. So I went to my best friend's mom and I said, I want to go to Mass, but I don't want to receive the Eucharist. I want to go to confession first. And she said, okay, don't worry about it. I wanted to talk to you about that. Don't worry. I'll go to Mass. I'll schedule an appointment later in the week to go to confession. The next day, Monday, I go to confession. I went to confession with this priest who I never met before. And I remember pulling up to the parish center, and I was like, I'm gonna tell this priest everything. I went in and I told this priest everything, all my hurts, my sorrows, my sins, everything that has ever afflicted me. I spent 3 hours with that priest that night. I don't think he had that on his schedule to spend 3 hours with me, but he did. And for an entire hour, I practically cried to a man who I never met before. And it was through that priest that, for the first time in my life, I experienced Christ. I experienced this love, this compassion, this mercy. And once I left that sacrament, it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was just set on fire, and this love of God just convicted me to go out and share this joy with others. The gospel message, that's what we're called to do, right? So I started going to all these prayer groups, and I began to realize that it's okay to live out your faith. You know, there's people my age living out my faith. I started learning how to pray the rosary. I started to receive the sacraments as often as I could. I started to grow in my daily prayer with the Lord. I started to grow in my love for Eucharistic adoration. I started to learn about saints, and I also started to just fall in love with God. And I started to begin to be healed from the wounds that I was covering up for all these years. Throughout these next couple of months, my own sinfulness, my own faults, my own vices, but as I stayed true to the sacraments, something inside of me was attracting me to the priesthood. I didn't even know with my past that I could be a priest or anything like that. So I threw it on the back burner. After a couple of months, this thought was still in my heart. I said, I got to talk to someone about it. So I went and talked to the priest who I went to confession with, and he told me, well, let's just discern this and see where it goes. I said, okay, no problem. So he taught me to begin to pray for my vocation. You know, everyone's called to a different vocation in life. After a year of discerning, I felt drawn to enter the seminary to at least discern the vocation in a more serious way. After 4 years of being in the seminary and growing in my relationship with God and through discerning, through prayer, I felt that I needed to take a step away from priesthood to discern the vocation of marriage. Currently, I'm in the best relationship that I've ever been in my entire life. I'm now a teacher at my alma mater where I went to high school, where I went to Catholic school. I'm the religion teacher there, and every day is a blessing to me. I never thought I would be there. And just to be with these kids each and every day of my life, pretty much, to impact them in some way, to help them realize that they are loved by God and that they're called to be saints, and that's not something for the few, but that's for everyone. Through it all, not only my journey has transformed, but even my parents. My dad reached out to me and he said, you know, Ryan, I see how happy you are, and I want that happiness. And I said, well, Dad, the only way you're gonna have this happiness is if you come back to God. And he said, okay. I scheduled an appointment with Father Maz. He was the priest who I went to confession with for the first time when I had my conversion. Through that priest, I think my dad was truly healed and transformed. For the next 2 years of his life, he was the happiest man I've ever seen. A loving father again, sober, just going to Mass. Every day he would say, I feel blessed. That was his big saying. My mom, shortly after that, then went to confession, then started going to Mass with me. But in the beginning of my transformation, my family then started to come back together as well. Even today, my parents are actually civil now. My older brother is married and has 6 children. My younger brother's in the Marines. And it's beautiful to see how everyone has turned out, you know, through this dark journey. In the end, everyone's turned out to be okay and in the right place where they're supposed to be. I never pictured I would be where I am today, but it's all through God's love, God's plan for me, God's mercy, God's compassion. My goals for the future, for my own spirituality, is this: to just continue to grow my relationship with God. We should do that every day. I feel like sometimes, many times, I forget to even turn to God and ask for God's help in my daily life. Sometimes I try to white knuckle my way through life still today. And I think it's important for me to know that God is there, that God has brought me through this entire journey, and that He's going to continue to bring me to where I need to be, to trust in His plan for me, and to cry out to Him when I need Him. Every time that I have cried out to God, He's answered. And as I look back on my entire life, I can see the hand of God leading me through it now. I didn't see it in the present moment, but as I look back to my past, I can see God's hand leading me through. What I want to say for those who may be on the fence about the faith, may be struggling in their own life in some way or another, may come from a broken home, don't be afraid to cry out to God. But when you do, I just ask that you're patient, that in God's timing, you'll understand why everything is the way it is, and that He is there, He is with you. He will bring you through, but you need to be faithful as well. My desire in life is to be a saint and to do God's will each and every day of my life, and that should be all of our desires. God gave me many gifts and abilities, just like He's given each and every one of us gifts and abilities. But those gifts and abilities aren't for myself, they're for everyone else. I'm called to use them for everyone else. And so I tell my high school students that what God has given you, you're called to use that for everyone else as well. And by doing so, you're transforming this world. My biggest quote that I look at, it's in my classroom. It's one of my motivations. I look to it every day. It's by St. Catherine of Siena. It is, "Be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire."